Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Are we enjoying our time with 360 Guidance so far? That's great. It feels good. I've been coming here for many, many years, and that's exactly my feeling about being here every year. It's really exciting to be back here in Denver once again. I think this is like my 8th or 9th year in a row being here. And it's really awesome because I get to meet new people all the time, and I get to see some old familiar faces. I just want to thank John and Nicole for once again having me here. It's always a pleasure and always an honor to be up here on the stage. So thanks for coming to my talk and listening. My name is Joe, and I am a freelance developer slash designer. I've been working for many years in this ecosystem, building stuff for various people. I have a podcast called Release Notes, you may have heard of, and a conference that goes along with it in October. If you want to come to Mexico and talk to me about it, it's going to be coming up in October. What I want to talk about today specifically is one of the apps that I built last year for myself as a personal project. Something that I wanted to put out in the store. I'm always putting new products out in the store because I just love having things out there for people to enjoy. And I love building things that I like to use myself. And this app called Recaf was a product that I put out in the store last September. I was putting the finishing touches on it, actually, as I was here last year. It was a lot of fun to build. As you can probably tell from the logo, it is a caffeine tracker. And that's the molecule for caffeine. So it helps you basically track your daily intake of caffeine. Whether you're trying to cut back and you're trying to kind of get a sense of your intake, whether you have the jitters like I do sometimes, or if you're just a stats nerd and you like to collect this kind of data about yourself, this is a really cool app for doing that. And there's a problem though with these kinds of apps. Any kind of app that is a tracking type system like this, any app even where that's like a daily journal where you're writing in the log entries, or maybe you're trying to collect your favorite quotes, or you're trying to find your favorite movies. Any of those types of apps have a fundamental user experience problem. And that problem is that you have to do all the work, right? I, as the developer of this app, cannot add the caffeine for you. You have to do it. You have to do the work. And so I need to figure out a way to get you into the habit of tracking your caffeine as someone who's building the container for this. As of right now, as we're standing here in 2019, there is no automatic way to detect when you've drunk some caffeine or eaten some caffeine. I'm sure Apple has a watch in a lab somewhere that's trying to detect this as we speak, but it does not exist yet in the real world, so we have to do this manually. And the only way you're going to do this manually is if you develop that habit. You have to want to do it badly enough, and then I have to build a tool that makes that easy enough to do. So my first goal with this app, of course, was then to make it as easy as possible to do it. Because one thing we know about human nature is that if something's difficult, you're not going to do it. Right? You're not going to do it. If you have to go through 15 layers of navigation just to figure out where the particular source is that you're trying to track, and it takes 10 steps to get your stuff in there, that's not going to get us very far. So I had to make it really, really simple to log your caffeine. And I feel like I did a pretty good job with that. One of the first things I did was I added these kind of frequent buttons. So when you launch the app, the first thing you see is this collection here of your most frequent sources, the things you log most often. Those automatically get generated, they get thrown right in your face, so that when you launch the app, you say, 90 times out of 10, I'm probably just having a coffee. I just press the coffee and then I go on about my day. One button and I'm done. Very, very simple. Now, for those times when you're not drinking something that you're having every day, like maybe you have an espresso after dinner, but only about once a month, I also gave you some favorites that you can select those types of items that you like to have occasionally, and all you need to do is swipe down and you can see all your favorites, and then you just tap on any one of those and you get the thing you want. Okay, that's pretty good. Well, what about if you're logging something really different or new that you've never had before? Okay, well, I wanted to make logging even custom entries that you've never done before really, really simple. And so you pick your category, you pick your source, you pick your amount, and you're done. I automatically fill out the date. If you want to change the date because you had it 2 hours ago, you can make that change. But 3 or 4 taps, and you're pretty much done. Okay, again, really, really simple. And if you want to add that to your favorites, you can actually do that right here. Your little favorites right there. Okay, so I made this, again, this is all about simplicity. And even on those little buttons for the frequents and favorites, I later added a way to just, force press or long press on those buttons, and now you can quickly change the amount. Like if you're having a 32-ounce green tea instead of a 16 today, you can make that change really quick. Or if you had it 2 hours ago and you want to change the date, no problem, you just swipe over to that button and you just change the date really quickly. Still, that wasn't easy enough, so I figured, okay, I'll go a step further and I'll make Siri shortcuts. Right? So now all I have to do is raise my watch here and say, hey Dingus, want a coffee? Right? And now my coffee's in. I didn't even have to launch the app, and now it's got my coffee tracked. Okay? So that's pretty cool. Siri shortcuts made that possible. And just to round things out, I decided, okay, well, I have a today widget. I might as well put my frequents on that as well. And why not, while we're at it, we'll also add the frequent items onto the watch app as well, okay? So I've got logging, as a simplistic thing as possible, pretty much covered in this app. It's not going to get any easier. But I still have a problem. It doesn't matter how easy it is if you don't remember to do it, right? You have to remember it, right? This is not a natural thing for us. When you go to buy coffee, you might think, okay, I'm going to have my coffee now. But if you're not used to actually writing that down, if you're not the kind of person who's been writing down their food intake on a regular basis, this is not a normal thing that we grow up doing for most of us. So it's a habit we have to actually foster and create in ourselves. And so even if it's really simple, if you stop doing it after a few days, you stop using the app, and then you stop paying me for my app, and I go out of business. So this is not good. So I need to figure out a way to remind people to log. And this is what I really want to talk about today, is the system I came up with for getting you into the habit of tracking. I think I came up with something, hopefully, that's clever, and something that will hopefully be something you can take to your own apps and utilize yourselves. So I need to remind people how to log. How do we remind people of things on our iPhones? Well, we use notifications, right? Everyone loves getting notifications all the time, right? Not really. So if we're going to do this, we got to do it the right way. But I have this ability. Apple gives me this API. I can say, hey, wait a second, maybe you forgot to track your caffeine. Did you forget? And because of these really cool extensions that came along with iOS 12, I can actually, right within the extension, let you change the time really quickly and go ahead and log it. So again, I don't even have to launch the app. I can just force press on this particular notification, and I can either log this, or I can hit that log something else button, and it'll bounce me into the app where I can make a change. Okay. So that's great. I have the notifications, but I need to figure out, when do I fire these notifications off, right? Well, I didn't want to do it the dumb way. And what I mean by dumb here isn't like you're stupid for doing it this way. It's more that your phone is stupid for not knowing more about you. Okay, I wanted a little bit of intelligence in when these reminders were coming about. Okay, so the dumb way to do this, and the lazy way to do this, is just pick a time. 9 a.m. every day, I shoot off a notification. Hey, did you forget to log your caffeine? Hey, did you forget to log your caffeine? Every morning, 9 a.m. just goes off, right? That's what 99% of your apps do, and that's why within 2 days you turn off notifications for most of your apps, right? This is silly, right? We have computers. There's no reason to do this. This is really dumb. And now all the engineers in the room are thinking, yeah, that is really dumb. I know what I would do. I'd set up this systems, settings panel where they can go in and they can tell the machine exactly when they want their notifications. I want mine at 6:15, and give me one at 7:14 on Wednesdays, and give me one, right? And I'm going to set this thing up, and then it'll give me exactly the notifications I want, right? No, we're not going to do it this way either. This is lazy as well, right? Yeah, it's a lot of work to implement this thing, but why are you, as a customer, having to tell my app when you log caffeine? My app knows when you log caffeine. You're logging it every day, hopefully, right? And so if it knows your caffeine habits already, why should you have to go ahead and reconfigure some stupid thing? This is the kind of thing that drives me nuts in software whenever I see it, when you're making me do things that the computer should already know. So let's do this the right way. The right way to do this, in my mind, was to come up with a design kind of spec, right? I've been a designer for many years. People hand me contracts all the time, and they say basically, here's your spec, here's what we need. So I wanted something that required zero configuration from the customer. Yes, you have to say, okay, I give you permission to give me notifications. That's it. I wanted you to have to do nothing else. Okay. I wanted it to learn quickly. I didn't want it to take 9 weeks before you started actually getting useful notifications. I wanted it to adapt to your behavior over time, so that, let's say, you stop drinking coffee every day, and now suddenly you're going to have green tea. I wanted the app to notice that and fix itself pretty quickly. And finally, the most important one, I didn't want to annoy you. This is the one that I think 90% of companies that are building systems for notifications forget about. But it was the most important one to me. Because you ultimately have the power to turn off notifications. And if you turn off notifications, I lose, you lose, we all lose, right? This great feature goes away, and it becomes useless to us. So we're going to design our solution based on this spec. And what's our first tool we're going to run to? We're going to go to Core ML, right? There's a machine learning problem, right? I'm a nerd, I'm a geek, I love getting into new APIs, and I found this cool new API, and Apple just gave it to me, and let me just dig into this, right? No, we're not going to use core learning for this. This is like, core learning for this is like using a shotgun to kill a fly, okay? Core learning, machine learning is a wonderful, beautiful thing that can do amazing stuff. There are talks this week about machine learning and all the stuff you can do with core ML. We're not going to be using it for this though, because this is not the right purpose for this particular function. We don't need artificial intelligence. This is the kind of thing that core ML is good at. Remember this? Right? Hot dog or not hot dog, right? You can feed the system a million pictures and say, these ones are hot dogs, these are not hot dogs. Eventually the computer learns to recognize the hot dog, right? It's a very definitive, very simple yes or no, black or white answer. Does this picture contain a dog in it or not? Does this picture contain a hot dog in it or not, right? There's a definite yes or no kind of answer, and you can feed it lots and lots of data, and that data is the same for everyone. What's a hot dog to you is also a hot dog to me. Well, unless maybe you live in Chicago, in which case I don't really know if that's a hot dog, but right? That's what they consider a hot dog. That's more like a salad on a bun to me. But anyway, the point is not really applicable to what we do. We can't pre-train our system because your caffeine habits are different from the person sitting next to you, from the next person over here, right? I could go out and grab average data of people drinking coffee, but that isn't really going to be all that helpful if you have a pattern that's very different, right? You might be out there and maybe you don't wake up till 2 p.m. because you have a job that's in the evenings. Maybe you only drink coffee on Thursdays and the second, third Wednesday of the month. Right? You like have some different pattern. And so I can't use anyone else's data, I just have to use yours. And if I'm using yours, I'm only getting a couple of data points per day, right? 1 coffee, 2 coffees, some of you might have 4 or 5 at most. That's the dangerous zone. But that's not a lot of data. It would take forever to train a model in this case. So we're not going to be using this. Instead, we're going to do something that's been around for decades and is tried and true. The good old take some data, throw an algorithm at it, and voila, we get a notification. Actually, to be more precise, we're going to get a optional notification. Okay? Because if I don't have enough data, and I'm not sure that this is the right time to be bugging you about whether or not you track your caffeine, I'd rather not send the notification. More importantly, if you tell me specifically by your actions that you never have coffee on Thursdays, guess what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to send you a notification on Thursdays. Because that's stupid. I should know that you don't have coffee on Thursdays or tea or whatever it is. Okay? So, in order to understand the data here, before we get to our algorithm, we need to understand how my app collects data. I have a custom object called log entry. And the log entry is basically just made up of 2 parts. Okay, the date, which is a good old-fashioned date. All right, the parts of the date that were really important to us in this case, the day of the week, and the particular time that you're logging. Actually, it's more important to the hour. We'll get to that in a second. And then, in addition to the date, we have in the log entry what I call log ingredients. It's another custom object that contains a source and an amount. The source is your coffee or cocoa beans or tea or whatever it is that you're having, and I have a bunch of data collected about each one of those, about how many milligrams per milliliter and things of that nature are in that source. And then the amount that you're having, whether you're having 12 ounces or 250 milliliters or whatever it happens to be, 2 shots, and so on and so forth. So that's the data that we have to analyze. When it comes to the day of the week, I had a friend when I was starting to explore this and I was starting to really go through the thinking process. A friend of mine said, yeah, you really ought to treat Saturday and Sunday differently from the rest of the week because a lot of people don't, they sleep in on Saturdays or they don't have coffee on weekends or, because they only have it when they're in their work environment and so on and so forth. And I said, well, heck, I'm a freelancer. What the heck is a Saturday? Right? I don't know what a Sunday is, let alone a Saturday. I'm here on a Monday doing this. Like my whole life is not normal that way. What about people, first responders and nurses and hospital workers and police officers, people who work 4 days on and 3 days off? They don't have regular weekends like everyone else. Retail workers work during the week. So this isn't going to be working. We need to split every day up into its own thing. So I decided I'm going to make a separate notification for each day of the week. So if you are the kind of person who just for whatever reason never has tea on Wednesdays, right, I want my app to notice that. Okay, and if you have tea on Wednesday, but then you have coffee on Thursday, I wanted to notice that as well. Okay, so when we talk about the hour, or the time specifically, we really want to only be concerned with the hour. And there's a reason for this. People argue with me about this. And the way I try to explain it is that we're trying to match patterns here, right? We're trying to figure out a pattern. Now, if we are looking at time that you're logging, and let's say you have coffee at 8:13 today, tomorrow you log at 8:14, the day before you logged at 8:12, right? If I'm looking at the minutes and I'm asking the computer, do any of these match? What are they going to say? No, right? But if I only look at the hour, they're all going to say, oh yeah, every one of those was between 8 and 9 a.m. Right? That's a pattern. The more specific you get when you're looking for these kinds of hits here, the more likely you're going to find a match, or less likely you're going to find a match, rather. You need to pull back a little bit and get a little more general. And a great way to do that in this case is to only look at the hour and not be too concerned with the minutes. Okay, so we're going to ignore minutes and only look at hours. We're going to look at 6 weeks of data only, because I don't need to know what you had for coffee 3.5 years ago. Okay? That's only going to tell me one of two things. It's going to tell me that you're still drinking coffee at 9 o'clock every day because you're a creature of habit, and I already have that data, it's redundant. Or it's going to tell me, it's going to skew my whole model by telling me that you still like coffee even though you stopped drinking it 3 years ago. Right? So I only need the last 6 weeks of data. That's enough of a chunk, in my case, to get the data that I need. Okay, and finally, I am only going to look at the first thing you log in the morning. This is another area of, I've had a few customers who've asked me, well, can you remind me about my second one that I have at 3 p.m.? Yeah, I could, okay? But think about it, there's a few reasons why this is a bad idea, and the reason why I only look at your first log. The first one, it goes back to that let's not annoy you factor. How many notifications from one app do you want to get in one day, right? So I don't want this to be bugging you 3 or 4 times a day. The other part of it is, I'm not going to remind you exactly when you have coffee. So let's say you had coffee like right around 9:15 every day, right? And I pop up my notification at 9:15, you're gonna be like, all right, give me a minute, right? If you're supposed to be somewhere, you're picking somebody up, right? You ever get that text at 9:01, you're supposed to be there at 9, hey, where are you? Like, all right, in 9:15, you're allowed to do that, right? In 9:01, it's like, hold your horses, bud. Okay, so I don't wanna annoy you, so I'm not gonna remind you at, if I notice that you're having coffee before 9 a.m., I'm gonna remind you at like 9 and a bit, right? So that if you normally have coffee around 8:15, I'll wait until 9 to see whether or not you actually forgot. Because guess what? If I let you rely on me to remind you every single time, guess what's not going to happen? You're never going to remember. You're going to rely on my notifications forever. In an ideal world, these notifications after 2 weeks, 2 months, you'll stop getting them, right? Because you'll be logging in such a good habit yourself. I will have trained you to log so well that you won't even need these notifications anymore. I never see my notifications anymore. It's just kind of hard from a testing standpoint for me nowadays because I'm always remembering to log. But I had to build that habit over time. Okay, so we're only looking at the first log of the day. So let's break this down though. Let's see what we're actually doing before we jump into some code. Okay, we're taking all of our data, every entry, every bit of caffeine you've ever logged into the system, and we're just breaking it down into the past 6 weeks. And then we're going to look at just this day of the week, right? Mondays in this case. Maybe it's Tuesday, maybe it's Wednesday, whatever day we happen to be looking at. We're going to do all 7 days. All right, actually, we're going to do 6 at a time, but we'll get into that in a minute. And then we just need the first log that you had on that particular day of the week. And so that leaves us with how many data points? Well, a maximum of 6, right? If you just started using the app 2 weeks ago, I only have 2 weeks. I'll do what I can with the 2, but okay, I have up to 6 data points to work with. And here's the point where I was talking with another friend, and he said to me, well, Joe, you ought to consider that something that somebody did this week or the week before is a little more important than what they did 6 weeks ago, right? If you're changing your habit, chances are the most recent data is a little more viable, a little more reliable a tell than something you did a while ago. So the easiest way to emphasize our most recent ones is just take them and double them, right? So that's what I do. So I count twice the most recent 2 weeks. And that gives me a total of 8 data points. And all I need to do with these 8 data points is analyze the hour in which they were logged, right? Or not, well, the hour that is set, not actually when the log was created, but when the date is in the log. And then finally, the log ingredients. What did you log so that I can tell the notification, hey, this should be a oolong tea, 12 ounces. Okay, so we're good, right? Well, no, because we still have another problem. Right? We forgot. And I forgot when I first built this, right, that no logging is still logging. Right? If you didn't log anything on Thursday, well, that's a data point, right? So I have to take into account any data in that last 6 weeks where you didn't log. I can't just take the ones where you did log. I need to factor in the empty ones too. So if you are not logging on a particular day, I need to count those as well and make sure that they're getting factored into the algorithm as well. Okay, so we've got 8 possible data points. We're looking for patterns. What we need is to get to the magic number. Anyone want to guess what the magic number is?
42.
And that's the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Now, the magic number in my case, this is this is something I had to develop, come up with. or a series of testing, but magic number for me is 3. 3 is almost half of an 8-point data set, right? If you're doing something almost half the time, that's a pretty good indication that I can remind you about it and you won't be too annoyed, okay? If I go for much higher than that, I don't get pattern matching often enough. If I go any lower than that, then it's like firing off notifications as soon as you had one coffee. So I need to, pick a number, and 3 turned out to be a pretty good number. It actually works out pretty well. If you look at this particular data set here, here's a person who had coffee at 8 o'clock or somewhere in the 8 o'clock hour 3 times. They had a coffee at 9, but then a tea at 9 once, and then they had a 7 o'clock coffee or something like that, and then maybe they've skipped 1 week, right? And that got doubled because it was a more recent one. Okay, but in this case, what wins is the 8 a.m. coffee. And looking at that data set, doesn't it kind of look like you're going to get that notification around 9:15ish? Doesn't that feel like a good time to be getting a reminder, right? Even for the time you had 7 or 9, it still kind of fits in. It kind of blends pretty well. If I hit that notification around 9:15, my app is looking pretty smart. In other words. Okay, so how do we generate these notifications? Well, in order to generate a local notification, anyone who's worked in the notification API knows we need a trigger. Triggers can be location-based, based on where you are physically, but they can also be time-based, and that's the ones we're going to use. In this case, I'm going to use specifically a weekday trigger. You can have a trigger that fires off on a particular day of the week, every Monday, every Tuesday, and then you can set it to repeat. And that's what I'm going to use. Okay, so what's our trigger made up of? Well, we just take the day of the week, right, from our date. And then from the time, we only care about the hour. We're going to add an hour to it, because remember, we're ignoring minutes, and we don't want to annoy people right away. If you normally have coffee at 8:58, I don't want to set off the notification at 8. I want to set it off at 9 something. And then when it comes to something, I put 12 in for the minutes. I know you're thinking, what the hell is 12? Why 12? Doesn't that seem kind of weird and random? Well, yeah, it's kind of weird and random. Okay, I picked it out of a hat. Now, I picked it for a couple of reasons. First off, when you set an alarm for the morning, you set it for 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30. Have you ever set an alarm for 8:12? A few people, I do it. I knew there were a few weirdos like me out there. It's a weird thing I have. I can't set an alarm for an exact time. But anyway, 12 is one of those times where it's less likely that another app is hitting you with a notification, in other words. Right? If 7 apps hit you with a notification at exactly the same time, chances are that's going to get lost in a buried field or whatever. So I picked 12 as a randomish number. I also like 12 as opposed to, say, 27 or 46. Because, again, if we look at the times you're logging, you might be logging at 8:01, right? And I don't want that notification to come out at like 9:56, right? 9:12 is only about an hour away. That's not too bad, right? And if you're logging at like 8:58, 9:12 is still almost 15 minutes later. It's not so bad, okay? I don't want to get too far away, right? So there's a little bit of a kind of a voodoo kind of magic to this. And there's a little bit of just feeling out your gut instinct. I have yet to get a complaint about the 12-hour-a-minute thing. I have yet to have anyone notice that it's always at 12. Right? Most people just, they see it pop up and they don't. I've never had someone write to me and say like, oh, well, why are my notifications coming in at exactly 12 after the hour? But yeah, so that's how we get it. Now I'm done, right? I can just go build this thing and I'm all set. Well, no, I still have one more problem. Okay, I need a training mode. I was talking to a friend again. I told him all of this, and he said, well, yeah, Joe, you got a problem. I said, what's that? He said, you got a 2-week trial. And if you're looking and paying attention to the math of my algorithm, at the very minimum, how long is it going to take before you start getting notifications from this? 3 weeks. So the 3rd week you will start getting a notification, because if you're doing it as your most recent ones do get doubled, but you only have 2 on that first week, then you'll have 4 on the second week, even if you're a very normal, very regular type of person that's having coffee at exactly the same time. So the trial is going to be over. You're going to have to decide whether or not you like my app before I show you this really cool marquee feature. That's bad business. I'm sure Ariel in the audience would agree with me. Right? So I need to make sure I'm showing off something, or at least let you know that this feature is coming and that it's going to do amazing, miraculous things for you. And so I created training mode in order to give you that. I figured that notifications that are a little dumber are better than no notifications at all. And at this point, I get the opportunity in the UI of my app to say, hey, look, something better is coming. We're training, right? And these notifications will get better over time. And this way, you at least know that that feature is there, okay? And then it's going to get better over time. I could make my trial 4 weeks, but then I don't get paid for 4 weeks, and that's a little crazy to me. So I'm going to keep it at 4. I've actually been considering bringing it down to 7, but that's a whole other story. So what does training mode look like? Well, I just take the first 3 weeks, right, the first 21 days that you're using the app, and I give you more generic triggers and more generic log ingredients. Basically, I look at what you logged yesterday for the first time in the day. Because most people, right, 80% of you probably have the exact same green tea at somewhere around the same time every day. So it's going to look pretty smart already. If you're an abnormal kind of person, you're going to at least be able to see like, oh, this is in training, it's still not quite right. And I do have a weird habit, I can see how I would make that mistake. Okay? I don't fire these off on weekends when we're in training mode though. I will not bug you on a Saturday or Sunday, just in case you're one of the many people that has normal weekends. And even if I don't get a match after 21 days, I do end training mode, and I consider that closed at that point. I say if I don't have enough data, then I simply won't remind you at all. Okay, because I don't want to keep giving you these half-baked reminders longer than 3 weeks. Okay, now finally we can look at some code. Okay, so flip over here to Xcode. So this, oh, that's kind of funny. Let's figure this one out.
Is that the new dark mode?
Indeed it is. Why can't I escape out of this? Okay. I'm just going to quit. Pardon the interruption. We're going to hope that Xcode doesn't remember that I was in full screen mode.
Maybe switch display here.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do that. All right, hang on for a sec. I can get to my actual... The funny part is, yeah, my bar is up here instead of where it should be. So... Nope, that's the wrong thing. I need displays.
Bottom left. They moved it.
Yeah, they move it every time, don't they? Arrangement. Does anyone see mirroring? Where is it? Arrangement. Mirror. That'll help. Okay. Now I can go back to Xcode. Pardon that interruption. Ah, there we go. Perfect. And yes, this is the new dark mode. Okay, so this is my class for generating the morning triggers. This is just creating the triggers for me. Okay. And it's a really simple class. It only has 3 functions. 2 of them are private because only this class needs to talk to them. The main one here is this generate morning triggers. Okay. So what this is going to do is it's going to immediately, first off, it's going to figure out what day of the week it is currently, because we're not going to do today's notification today. So on Monday, the app will not try to figure out when I should be reminding you about Monday. All right, we'll get to why in a minute with that. So we're going to skip Monday, or whatever day it happens to be, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm figuring out what day it is, and then I'm basically going, a weekday, by the way, is just an enum I created that has all 7 days of the week in it. Pretty simple. So I go ahead and I create an all case of that enum, and I filter out today. All right, and then I'm going to map over it and try to create a trigger for each one of the days. And anytime it doesn't come up, I'm compact mapping here in this case, because it might be optional. I might not get a trigger. But for every trigger I do get, okay, I go ahead and I call this get trigger and log ingredients function. It goes and grabs or attempts to grab those triggers. And it gives me not just the triggers, but also the log ingredients, because I have to batch that up into the user info dictionary so I can send it with the notifications so that the notification extension knows what to show you. Okay, so I'm basically building that. If I can't get these, okay, then we're going to look at whether or not I'm in training. We're going to look at whether or not it's a Saturday or Sunday. Okay, and if I'm not in training, right, or it's a Saturday and Sunday, I'm going to return nothing. Right, that's this nil here. And if I am in training and it's not a weekend, then I would get what I call a generic trigger, which is basically just going to look at what you had yesterday and what time you had it yesterday and send a notification that way. Okay, pretty straightforward. The function here for doing an individual one is basically pretty straightforward as well. Okay. I have this class called Day of the Week Routine. A Day of the Week Routine is basically doing the heavy lifting here. It's going to be doing most of the math for me. I will get into that in a second. But basically, I tell it what day of the week it is that's in question, right? And then I basically attempt to get this matching hour, matching log ingredients, and matching amounts. If I can get all 3 of those things, great, I'll move on. If not, I'm going to return nothing. We don't have a trigger here, okay? But if I do get a trigger, you'll notice that's what I do. I create the trigger here, the actual calendar notification trigger, matching the hour from that, right? With the current calendar, by the way, you have to play with it and make sure you're getting your time zones correct. The hour plus 1, because I'm adding 1 to the hour, okay? The 12 minutes, there's my 12 minutes there. I can make it whatever. I can make it 14 right now and just confuse the heck out of my customers, right? And then, of course, the weekday that's in question, okay? And then I also box up the log ingredients and send those as well. Again, they're going to become part of the user info dictionary. Okay, so let's dig into the day of week routine, because that's where the good stuff is happening. Okay, so day of the week has, I have to know what day of the week it is, so I can feed that into the system. I assume everyone here is pretty familiar with the concept of taking all my log entries and figuring out just the last 6 weeks, right? We know the basics of how to map that down, right? Or filter out by date and things of that nature. Getting to the specific entries on this day of the week, again, I just filter for the ones that happened on that day of the week. I have a nice little, where is that? Oh, here it is. Yeah, this guy here. I can take any day. I made a nice little extension. I can take any day and immediately just return the day of the week that it happens to be. That's very, very helpful. So I can take any date in the universe and tell me what day it was. So I basically do that. To get the first entries, I basically do the same thing. I use this function called each pair. This is another extension. I actually stole this from Sarush Kanlo. If you guys are familiar with Sarush, he blogged about this years ago, and he generously let me steal it from him when I was working with him on a project. This is kind of an easier way than doing zip and drop first kind of stuff. It's very, very simple. It basically lets me look at within an array. I can look at the object and the next object in the array. I don't have to play with offsets and everything else. It'll just let me see the next object, and then I can compare it. So I can be able to say, well, if the next one is on the same day as this one, that wasn't the first one, okay? And I just keep moving until I get to a new day, and then I know that's the first one from the day. Of course, remember they're in reverse order. So I've got all that down. Let's assume, right, we've got to the point where we've got all our entries on the day of the week. The big important two functions I really want to look at is these two, the most common hour and the most common source and amount. So we're going to take our weighted first entries, which again is just taking those first entries and doubling up the last two. And the first thing we're going to do here is try to determine whether or not we have an hour. If we don't have a matching set of 3 at 11 o'clock or 3 at 9 o'clock or whatever, then we can fail this out and return nil. So I first take the weighted first entries and I map over just the hours, right? And I'm basically just returning the hours in there, and then I'm going to look for the mode, right? Because that's basically what I'm looking for, is what's the most common item in that array. The mode is another custom extension that I built. There's lots of variations on this, but it's fairly simple, straightforward. You can take any array of any elements, and basically it'll tell you not only which one is the most common in there, but it'll also tell you what the actual frequency of that is. And so I can tell, okay, the most common thing in here is green tea, and it occurred 4 times, that kind of a thing, okay? And you'll notice it's actually returning an array here of elements because it is possible to have a tie. You could have 3 coffees and 3 teas. So I need to know that. Or in this case, with the hour, we could have 3 at 9 o'clock and we have 3 at 8 o'clock, right? And so how I handle that is in here, when I get that mode back, the first thing I do is I check, okay, do we have at least 3 of these? Is the frequency, is the count of these at least 3? And is it greater than my null entry? So again, I have to factor in and make sure how many times did you log nothing on this day of the week? And if you have more than that amount, also we fail out. And then finally, I take the actual value. If that's true, then I'll give you the actual. And I pick the max in this case because I'd rather notify you late than early, right? So if you have 3 at 9 o'clock, you have 3 at 10 o'clock, I'd rather send it at 10:15, right, than at 9:15. And so I just go to the max value there. And that gets me my hour. And once I have an hour, if I don't have an hour, I just quit and I'm done, all right? If I have that hour, then I feed that hour into my most common source and amount. And this is how I figure out my source in question and the amounts that it was most frequent as well. So I take those weighted first entries and I figure out which entries actually happened at this magic hour, right? So I'm basically just pulling out the hour. And then I'm coming in here and I'm mapping, the drink ID, which again, this is how I know which source it is. And I'm basically getting the mode of that and figuring out, are there more than 3? Again, because you might have 3 at 11 o'clock, but 2 of them are coffee and 1 more tea, right? So that's not a match, we gotta move on. So I'm gonna make sure you have at least 3 of those. And of course, then I'm gonna take, in this case, the min value. This is kind of a fake. If I have a tie, I'm just gonna pick one, sorry. If you had tea at 3 o'clock, or at 7 o'clock 3 times in a row, and you had coffee at 3 o'clock, whatever one comes first alphabetically in the ID, which is the UUID, is what you're going to get notified about. I didn't have a good way to determine which one was which in the case of a tie, and I figured I'm just going to go with that. And then finally, I determine what that source is, and then for the amount, I do the same thing. I basically check, make sure we're having the same amount for at least 3 times. We figure out what that is. It's just a double, so in this case, we do want the minimum of those. And then we basically return those, the source and the amount. And that basically gets us what we need to make our notification. Okay, and let me just go real quick where the actual notifications are being generated in my notification manager object. I'm basically setting up the generation of triggers. This is where I actually fill in the body, right? The actual text of the notification. I have a simple title that I have in here. It's and the body of there, and then I feed it in a default sound. I should come up with some sort of like cool coffee gurgling sound, but I haven't done that yet. And then I pack up the user info, which is going to have the log ingredients, so that my notification extension knows what image to show you. It knows what to log when you actually hit the log this button. And that's basically it. I feed it into my queue, and I send off that request. Okay? Pretty straightforward stuff. The thing I'm trying to get across here is that actually coding this took about a day. Thinking about it took about 4 weeks. So this is the kind of thing where like you're going to benefit from thinking about and bouncing it off friends and worrying about like, what if this and what if that? The coding part itself is pretty straightforward once you figure out what you want to build. Okay. So I did run into a couple of gotchas while I was doing this, a couple of things that might not apply to you in your case, depending on the kind of app that you're building. But if you're building a health kit-based app like I am, this is the part of the talk where I tell you that my app has no database. When you log Caffeine with Recap, it never gets written to the app itself. It goes immediately straight to your health kit database. And when you launch the app and you want to see how many caffeine samples you've had for the last 6 weeks, I read that directly from Recap, right? From HealthKit. Because HealthKit is a locally stored, encrypted, synchronized database that's sitting on your phone. Why would I duplicate that? Well, turns out there's a good reason to duplicate that, maybe, because I did run into a couple of gotchas. One of them is that the HealthKit database is locked out to me sometimes. Even if you give me permission to read and write your caffeine, there are times when I can't read and write your caffeine, okay? Mainly whenever your phone is locked, okay? And you think, well, why is that a problem? If you launch the app, obviously. But remember, at the beginning of this talk, I told you don't have to launch my app to log, right? You can use Siri to log. You can log with your watch. You can log, all kinds of different ways. And so how am I going to read this data while this is happening? Well, fortunately, I can, while I'm locked out of reading, I can submit a request to write. So I am covered when it comes to you saying, hey, Dingus, log me some coffee. What's going to happen is it's just going to wait until the next time you unlock your phone, and then it's going to go ahead and do that. So that's not too bad. But for things like my Today widget, knowing how to update that, I did run into some problems. More pertinent to this talk, I ran into some problems when I realized that my notifications math and all that logic is happening in the background, right? I set off a background request to refresh these every day. And the reason why I do that is because, as I said before, you might never launch my app. I build an app that you don't have to launch. If you want to just log your coffee every day, you can do that for months. And if I'm not updating your notifications in the background, I'm not updating them, right? So I had to start updating in the background. So if I'm updating in the background and I can't get a hold of the data I need in order to analyze it, I'm in trouble. So what did I do to get around this? Well, I'm just counting on the fact that sometimes it's going to run while your phone's off. I'm going to count on the fact that at some point your phone is unlocked during the day, and at some point Apple's going to send that background request while you're in some other app, right? So what I do is, the first thing I do is I check. I just say basically, is there any HealthKit data right now? Do I have access to it? And if it says no, then I say, okay, you can have your process back. I don't need to do anything. And if your phone is unlocked and you're doing whatever, and it will give the HealthKit database information, that's when I update. And since I'm only doing these, each day of the week is different, I only have to make sure that happens once every week, right, for your particular day of the week. So as long as by next Monday this thing gets written again, I'm in good shape. This, by the way, is why I don't do today's, right? Imagine a scenario where you log coffee at 8:15 every day, right? My notification is going to go off at 9:12, right? So you log at 8:16 or whatever it is that you normally do. I cancel the notification. Great, right? This thing goes into the background and immediately resets up Monday's notification, and guess what happens at 9:12? You get your reminder, right? So I can't remind you for the rest of that day. I have to wait, okay? And I set this up as repeating reminders because I didn't want to have to say, give me 8 million reminders just so I'm covered for the next few months, right? I just wanted to set up a Monday reminder and just say repeat it. The problem with repeating reminders, though, is you can't cancel just today, There's no way to say just cancel this one but keep Mondays for the followings. All right, so I have to recreate that Monday notification at some point. And so in practice, this has worked out very well. It turns out that we all use our phones enough that that background process request does end up happening at least once by the end of the week, and I've never run into a real issue with this. There are some issues with people with time zones traveling, right? Because I do, in there, I factor in the time zone, of course, of the individual log entries. And so when I came here from, I was in California before I came here, I'm actually from New York, so I've been on 3 different time zones in the same week. There is a chance that following morning it'll go off at the wrong time because it didn't have a chance to refresh. Yeah, it's occupational hazard. By day 2, it usually fixes itself. But I don't know any better way to work around that at this point. So that's just some of the gotchas that I ran into with this, some of the things to be aware of if you're doing your notifications in the background. Okay, so to wrap things up, what did I learn through all this? In order to have an intelligent app, you don't need CoreML per se. You do for certain things. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing resource. But we can make our apps a heck of a lot smarter just by applying a little bit of good old-fashioned thinking. All right? Right? What is the definition of design, right? Caring about something, spending a little bit of time to actually care whether something works properly. We're all designers. Every developer in this room is a designer. This is a design problem that I solved, right? It was a heck of a lot of thinking and went around, and a lot of care went into making sure that this happened when I wanted it to happen. But it's worth it in the end. I can't tell you how many times I launch apps every day, and I'm like, why is this doing, like, this app ought to know by now that I don't want to go here, I want to go here, right? Don't get me started on Apple TV apps. But it pays off, because I get notes like this all the time from people who are using the app who are very happy with it. And they notice stuff like this. Hey, this thing didn't go off on Saturday or Sunday, and then I got a notification again on Monday. That's amazing. How did you know that? Right? Well, I just paid attention. Right? We're not being smart so much as we're just paying attention. Okay? So that's it. If you want to know more about Recaf, you can find it on the App Store, recaf.app on the web, and you can always email me at josie@mac.com if you have any questions. I can take them now. I think I have a few minutes. Thanks.
What do you use to document and organize your thoughts on how that decision process would be made?
That's a great question. What was I using to document my thought process is the question while I was thinking this through. I am one of these people that does most things in my head, to the chagrin of my business partner, Charles, with release notes. I am not a person to write things down as often. I do use the app drafts, Greg Pierce's drafts. And that's a good way for me to get my thoughts down when I'm laying out a pattern like this. It's really kind of loose for me though, and mostly for me, it's talking it through with friends. I will get on Slack with people that I trust, and I'll say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Would you be annoyed if you got this kind of a notification versus this one, or is that enough? And that's how I ended up finding out things like, well, hey, your free trial is going to end before anyone even gets a notification. Okay, that's a problem, right? So a lot of it is just discussion back and forth. But then, yeah, I do keep notes in drafts, loose notes though. I'm not particularly strong about that. Other questions?
Did you have any concerns that by reinforcing caffeine tracking behavior, you would also reinforce caffeine drinking behavior?
That's great. Is there a concern, the question is good, is there a concern that by reinforcing people to track their caffeine, that I'm giving them some kind of incentive to drink more, right? Because, hey, that's kind of fun. It's a dopamine release to see my data, and I can look at it. If there's no data, that looks like a bad thing, right? It's, I don't know. I mean, I look at like weight tracking apps, and you do get a satisfaction from the weight going down, but would you get a satisfaction from showing less caffeine over time? I do. I ended up getting diagnosed with a heart issue after I made this app, oddly enough. And one of the things the doctor told me is I need to reduce my caffeine intake. And so I suddenly had an app that I didn't realize was going to help me do this. And so, yeah, I make sure in my literature and everything, all the marketing for the app, particularly on my website, and inside the app there's a link to my website where it shows facts about caffeine and what you ought to be concerned about. Like basically that if you had 2 tablespoons of pure caffeine, you would die. So imagine how much you're taking in your body. I see some of these drinks at Starbucks that are like literally like 700 or 800 milligrams of caffeine in one drink. Okay, like 1,000 milligrams a day is pushing it. 500 is like recommended or less. I do less than 300 now. I feel better when I do that. So yeah, it's a personal thing, and I do my best to not say, like, I don't like pop up a smiley face and be like, hey, you logged another coffee, good to go, have two tomorrow. We're not gamifying this in any way, but that is a real concern. My hope is that people are using this to help limit their caffeine and not have too much of it. Yeah, I could add it as a mode. Like, I could add goals, right? Which would be a really cool feature. I could basically say, like, I'd like to have 100 milligrams less asthma, because I do calculate your 7-day average, your 38-day average. I could say, like, here, set your goal. What would you like your average to be? And then say, this is how long it'll take you to do that based on what you're doing. Yeah, that kind of stuff is, that's what I love about an app like this. It's brand new. Building up, you do build up an immunity. The other thing I want to add in this, which I think will be awesome, is to combine sleep tracking data, which will be from another app, obviously, but to combine that with, put that on a chart, basically show, like, here's how you sleep when you have this much caffeine, here's how you sleep when you have this much caffeine. I did that myself, manually, just by looking over my own health kit statistics, and I found that there's absolutely no correlation for me between caffeine. I could drink a pot of coffee and go to bed. I'm one of those genetically weird people that caffeine does not keep them awake. However, I do get massive heartburn and other kinds of acid reflux problems. And so, there are other downsides as well to having too much of a good thing. And that's another reason why I made the caffeine molecule. I go out of my way to not say coffee in this app, because while a lot of caffeine trackers all focus on coffee, there are tons of tea drinkers out there. There are tons of people who have, chocolate, protein bars that have caffeine in them, believe it or not. Like a lot of, if you're a Red Bull and vodka kind of person, you're having caffeine, whether you know it or not. So, there are lots of different sources of caffeine, and you should be aware of all of them. A lot of people have written to tell me that they didn't realize how much soda they were drinking and how much caffeine that was. It's a lot if you start calculating it. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is just more about your decision to use HealthKit as a data store. Just out of curiosity, did that happen by accident, or did you start just like to get something running to use HealthKit and then dump core data later, or
right.
Decision?
So the question is about why HealthKit and why I picked that as my data store, and was that an accident, or was that just something that was like, hey, this will get me there faster? It was all of the above. A good friend of mine suggested it, and when he just kind of put it out there, because I said, hey, I want to do a caffeine tracker, and I'm going to write to HealthKit. He's like, well, why don't you just use HealthKit as your data store? I'm like, I can do that. And then I started building it, and then it wasn't until weeks into the actual process, and I was getting errors, that I realized, oh, I don't have access to this when the phone's locked, because I wasn't reading the documentation as well as I should have been. And that's when I ran into some of the errors. If I had known about some of those errors, I may have rethought it, but honestly, I'm really happy that I can tell my customers that there's literally no way for me to know what they're drinking. Like from a privacy standpoint, my app is foolproof. It has, even if I were running to a server, which I'm not, of my own, right? There's no way for me to get the data. Like, Apple can't even read that data. It's encrypted before it goes up to the iCloud. So it's a really secure data space. And I found the API is, because it's all local, it's real quick, and it doesn't matter if you're connected to the internet. You don't get any kind of networking errors. You ask it for how much caffeine came by in the last 60 days, and it just spits it back out at you really fast. So, and it's on the watch. So there are limitations on the watch. You can only get about 8 weeks worth of data on the watch. So I can never show you all of your data just on a watch. I'm hoping that's something that'll get lifted as Apple makes the watch more independent. But I found that it was a good decision. I'm not unhappy about it. I had to do some workarounds, but I think at the end of the day, it was a heck of a lot easier than trying to do core data or MySQL or some kind of database, and then trying to sync that up with HealthKit. I've seen those nightmares with people's apps, like, why is the app telling me this, but HealthKit's telling me this? It's like, yeah, that's a problem. I do want to have a way to back up data, however. I did run into an issue where Apple accidentally, anyone who was on the beta this season knows that iCloud had some issues. And so yeah, some of my data got wiped out in that process, and because it was only in HealthKit, that could be a problem. So I do want to figure out some way to manually, if you wanted to, say, hey, let me store this separately in my own pile, but I'll get there. There's so many features this app still needs. I love brand new apps because it's only a year old. It's going to be, there's so many features that I want to add that I'm not there yet. Okay, I think that's about all the time I have. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the week.